Father,
Hi.
welcome. A lot to talk to you about, Father.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming
Thank you.
on with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you wrote
Thank
a book called Angelic Virtues and Demonic Vices, Aquinas' Practical Principles for Reaching Heaven and Avoiding Hell. What a great Lenten read.
Oh, yeah.
Father, yeah. So in your book, you divide it into two sections, vices and virtues. Why did you do that?
Well, the more you and I love the outcomes of virtue, the more we hate the outcomes of vice.
Makes sense.
That's just the way things are,
Mhm.
you know?
Sure.
The more you, if you're a piano player, the more you dislike mistakes, the more you want to get it right.
Amen.
And so I think I started with the vices first, and then I went to the virtues second, because most people are more, shall we say, more akin to the vices than they are to the virtues.
Oh, yeah.
Then I try to show the consequences of the vices, what they do to the intellect, the will, the emotions. And then part two, now here's what happens when you strive and struggle and fight for the virtues, because the vices are your enemies. They're hidden quite often, and sometimes they're not so hidden. It depends upon the imagination and a whole series of other things.
Sure, that makes sense. Father, this is an interesting question. I don't mean to throw you a curveball, but you make the point that there seem to be 8 capital vices, but the church and tradition of the arts indicates 7. Can you explain on that?
Sure.
Good.
St. Thomas is the one who teaches that there are 8.
Well, that's good enough for me.
That's the first thing. And the church's Council of Trent, the present Vatican, the Catechism of the Catholic Church starts out with pride. Now, if Thomas isn't too far off, because he will say that the property of pride is first vainglory. The Catechism doesn't speak about vainglory, and neither does the Council of Trent, to my knowledge. And so he kind of, the church kind of, shall we say, conflates the two, because for Thomas, pride first is purely interior, and then it leads to the desire for other people to fawn all over you, to praise you, to thank you, to adore you, to glorify you, blah, 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 blah. So that's why the church seems to kind of put the two together. Secondly, for Thomas, the pride is the queen of the virtues, and the other 7 are her lieutenants. That is to say, her lieutenants in the interior battle against sin, and in the interior battle to grow in virtue and grace. Okay.
Right.
Now, having said that, then each lieutenant then gives birth to what Thomas calls daughters of each one of the lieutenants, daughters from within. And generally, every vice has anywhere from 7 to 8 daughters. Outcomes, further sins, further problems.
Yeah.
Does that explain it?
Yes, you did a great
Absolutely.
explanation.
Yeah.
I love it. I want to take more classes from you.
Absolutely. Father, Father's giving us a class on air to thousands of people.
Exactly.
So thank you very much, Father. Father, if we are inheritors of the wounds of original sin, what makes it possible for any one of us to grow in virtue?
Well, first of all, as St. Thomas teaches us, and so does the church, we're not totally corrupted by original sin. We're kind of corrupted. That is to say, well, we come into this life without sanctifying grace. We come into this life a little wounded in the intellect, not so much for Thomas. Certainly, we all have kind of weak wills, and our emotions are never quite easily in sync with what's reasonable. And quite often, our emotions get the best of us, okay?
Yep.
Now, having said that, that's original sin. Then along comes Jesus Christ, as you know, and he suffers and dies, etc., establishes a church that pours out what St. Thomas would call not only sanctifying grace, justifying grace, but assisting grace so that we can accomplish God's will. God doesn't just simply lead out a bunch of precepts and commandments and says, here's what I want you to do to get into heaven, period. I'll watch you.
Yeah.
No. He puts out these precepts and commandments and counsels too. And he says, now I'm going to give you assisting graces. Today, following a Dominican father of the 1600s, I think, or 1500s, Dominic de Soto, he called it actual grace. See?
Yeah.
And that those actual graces give us the little strengths, if we consent to them, to fight the vices as best as we can, and eventually to conquer them. Not their first movements, not the temptations that come from within. The temptations aren't sins yet, strictly taken, because we don't will them. They kind of just pop up, you see, like an earthquake. It's what we do with them.
Yep.
So we get the graces to sort of push them out of our minds and hearts and imaginations and memories, and then try to do the right thing, because we want to please God, yes, but that also secondarily, it's to keep us integral, to keep us human, truly human, to keep us, shall we say, self-possessed, so that we slowly but surely live by true reason and faith and grace and even the inspirations of the Holy Spirit, and thereby we become holy. And if we don't, well, then we go to confession to get more grace. If we don't pray, we ask God to give us more grace. The more we try to grow in prayer, then we get more assisting graces to face the daily trials and difficulties that any state of life has. And we all have them, from Pope to somebody who's, a dishwasher in a restaurant.
I love it. Father, you speak the language of the people. I love it.
Oh, yeah.
I do.
Blue collar.
Well, so does St. Thomas.
Yeah,
Thomas
he does.
uses language.
And this is why Fulton Sheen, I'm just going to bring something up about actual grace. Bishop Sheen is a Thomist, and he was able to take what Thomas said and put it into the common language. And I get that from you also. I think that's a gift, so God bless you.
Oh, it isn't me. Thomas himself is putting it.
I know, but that's why I think we need to get back to Thomas more and more in the church today.
That's true. Agreed.
Yeah, I think you would.
He's called the preferred doctor of the church by the Second Vatican Council. But that doesn't mean that everybody prefers it.
I did not know that.
I didn't know that.
Well, I learned something right there.
Yes, thank you.
Father, let me throw another. I'm not throwing you curveballs, but I use my...
Throw them. I love curveballs. You can hit them out of the baseball park.
Okay.
Curveball.
So which is more important, receiving the sacraments or prayer, or both?
Well, it's not either or. It's both and.
Exactly. That's a very Catholic approach, isn't it?
Yes.
Of course. Just like we should hate vice and love virtue, not either or, both and.
Exactly.
If I go around hating vice all the time, but I don't have a love for the virtues, well, I'm not going to grow in virtue.
Right.
That's right.
If I say I just going to be virtue, but I don't care, I'm not going to hate the vices, and I'm not going to grow in virtue. Common sense.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yes.
So, Father, what's the role of the study in the life of virtue? What is the role?
Well, many people know this, believe it or not, that St. Thomas in the tract on temperance speaks of a potential part of temperance called studiositas, translated study. It's a little virtue. And it's a virtue that enables us to know truth. Truth of mathematics, truth of physics, truth of chemistry, but especially truth of our faith. Because the more we say we love our faith, the more we want to understand our faith. I mean, we don't just simply say, I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and blah, 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 blah. No. When I say the creed, when I pray the creed, those are concepts.
Yeah.
Those have ideas. So as I study those ideas, that enables me then to know more about God. And as you know from experience, the more you know somebody that's beautiful and good and true, the more you love them. Knowledge is the introductory virtue in theology to charity. And then as you grow in charity, then the more you begin to understand your faith. It's just that simple. And that's true in human nature. Human nature, if I'm a 18-year-old guy, I see a girl and I kind of like her, I fall in love with her, I want to marry her, let's say, then I have to get to know her, And the more I get to know her, the more I appreciate her virtue, her goodness, her good qualities, etc. And she's probably will make an excellent wife. Yeah, so that is simple. This is not rocket science.
No.
Now, there's a vice called curiositas, where you don't strive to know the truth. You just sort of want to read for the sake of reading, to show off, or you want to study things that don't have any real practical value or even theoretical value, or you don't have the talent to be able to understand. And so you kind of pretend you want to create a false image of yourself. All of that is the sin of curiositas. But studiositas, on the other hand, leads us into prayer, into meditation, into contemplation, and the ability to appreciate the Mass, whether it's in English or Latin or French or Italian or Jewish or Hebrew. The Mass is the Mass. And so the more you understand what the meaning of the Mass is, it doesn't make a difference what language it's in, because you're there in the presence of the passion, death of Christ and his resurrection.
Father, would it be a fair statement to say that the sin of Eve was curiosity?
Yes, I think so. Curiositas. Yep. That's the way the old evil one tempted her, primarily by, a few other things too. There was also not only that, but she also thought that she could have certain gifts without depending upon God. Yeah. And so he used curiositas in there too. Well, a lot of things went on in the East.
Yeah. Father, why is meditation and contemplation so important in the life of the ordinary Catholic?
Well, think about it. Let's reverse. Let's ask the question, why is meditation and contemplation so important for the thief?
His salvation.
Exactly.
Let's slow down.
Okay.
The thief wants to rob the bank. Okay, so let's say, why is it important for a jewel thief or for a bank robber to have contemplation and meditation? Well, he's meditating all the time. He's figuring out, how am I going to rob the bank? So he's going to study the bank, the times, when they bring in the money, when they take out the money and all that, and when's the proper time to go in with a mask and a gun and rob the bank and then be successful. That's meditation to do an evil.
Wow.
And once he does rob the bank, what does he do? He goes home, he throws the money up in the air and delights in the money. He's contemplating now his success. He's contemplating the delight of these tens of thousands of dollars he's got in his arms. Okay? Now, let's reverse. Why is contemplation and meditation necessary for salvation? Well, let's use the same example. We want to get into heaven. It's difficult. It's a little hard. So we try to study what are some of the ways in which we can do God's will, grow in virtue, overcome vice. And so we meditate on the mysteries of our faith and mysteries of our morals, and we try to study what they are, and we try to study now, how am I going to grow in them? That's meditation.
Yeah.
Then as I'm slowly growing in grace and virtue, now I'm contemplating the grace. I'm contemplating God who's given me the grace to do this. And then I might even start contemplating the goal, the end, heaven itself, and who is the Trinity, and why is this so important? And I might delight in these things. That's called contemplation. Simple. Now, if I can't do that, I try to contemplate Christ, or think about Mary and her virtues and how I want to become like her, like John the Baptist or John the Apostle, or all the apostles, or all that St. Paul says. Gee, these are things I think these will bring me closer to God, and then I'll also kind of think more and more about God, thinking more and more about what he's done for me and how he is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why it's necessary for salvation. You don't get into heaven mindless normally unless you're a baby baptized.
Father, you reminded me.
Yeah, that was so good.
That
was so good.
I remember a priest telling me this, change your meditation, meaning stop meditating on the person that hurts you, because you can meditate on that, right? Let's meditate on the passions of Christ. So I thought that was great. Next question.
But let me just, Father, just make this quick. Yeah, because something else has come to my mind as you gave us an explanation. Do angels and demons meditate? Just yes or no, and contemplate? Yes or no? Just we don't have to go along with it because I want to get to other questions.
Of course they contemplate.
Got it.
Intellects.
Perfect. Okay.
That makes sense. Hey,
it makes sense.
Father, why does St. Thomas call pride the queen of the capital vices?
Long time to say, but let's put it in as much as simple language as we can.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, he defines pride in kind of it's a two-pronged vice. On the one hand, it's self-inflation, thinking of how wonderful I am, what glorious I am, I am just the greatest and the best and the best and the best. Then that leads to, I don't need God. I don't need God. I don't need God. God isn't important. God is third in my life. Then he's zero in my life. Now, once that happens, then you've closed off source of grace. Okay, that's the first thing. Mm-hmm. But even if it doesn't close, even though you may not be an atheist, well, then what happens? You start to think, well, what can boost my ego? Well, praise and honor and glory from people, yes, but also having more goods, having more wonderful things. And so enter avarice, the root of sin. So I want more and more because I'll feel better and better, and I'll be more affirming and firming, and I'll be higher and higher in people's esteem if I have a better car, if I have a better degree, if I have a better this, a better that. I am a superstar. And then if you have something I don't have, then that leads to envy.
Yep.
See, getting sad over somebody that has things that I don't have, or talents that I don't have, all that stuff, you know? Should I go on?
No, you nailed it, Father. I love it. I wish we had another hour with him, Jess.
No, sorry.
Go ahead, brother. What's next?
Father, so is the vice of acedia also called sinful sadness and laziness the worst of the capital vices?
Yes and no. A lot of us would prefer to just simply call it, as you put it, acedia or achadia. Mm-hmm. Or I think the better translation is spiritual boredom. Mm. What does spiritual boredom do? Well, prayer, going to Mass, thinking about God, is perceived as a kind of an evil to avoid. It's an apparent evil, but you think there are degrees of achadia or acedia or spiritual boredom, but the depths of achadia is that all these things are just enemies to you. And so yuck, prayer, yuck, Mass, yuck, sacraments, yuck, church, yuck, awful, 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 awful. And so then I throw myself into sins of the flesh or sins of the spirit. And so from that perspective, achadia is the coup de grace of the capital vices. Now that doesn't mean that you can't have occasional, shall we say, moments of achadia in anybody's life. Sure. That can happen. But when it becomes predominant and profound, then this is what happens. Choosing of an avoidance of a true good, so that you can pursue what you think is a false good. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, Father, quick one. I hope it's a yes answer for Mom and Dad listening. Can your book teach parents how to educate their children in virtue?
I think so, if they put their thinking caps on. St. Thomas is difficult to read. When I used to read him, I'd do that to fall asleep. It's very easy to fall asleep on the hard section.
Yeah.
That is to say, the prima pars whereas you talk about Trinity, God, and then the Tertia part is on Christ. There are a lot of sections in there. You have to kind of know a lot of philosophical background.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the virtues and the vices, I think an 18-year-old can understand St. Thomas. I don't think it's a little dry. I mean, the style is not fun to read. So that's why I try to show how by taking good sections of it that are so clear that an idiot can understand them, well, then you might be able to really understand what it means to educate your children, as distinct from forcing your children to be good.
Great distinction. Yep.
Father, what's more important, the desire for heaven or the fear of damnation?
I would say that objectively speaking, in the order of abstraction, the desire for God, of course, is more important because that's what you're made for. That's what you're designed for.
Amen.
You're not designed for damnation. You're designed for fulfillment and absolute happiness. You're not designed for absolute misery, okay? Then speaking subjectively, sometimes the fear of damnation might spark you away from grave sin and help you start to thirst for God somewhat, see? So it's not an easy answer. You can't say, absolutely speaking, one or the other. It's sort of,
got it.
In the order of abstraction, definitely heaven. And in the real order, quite often when temptations really get grave, sometimes having meditated upon damnation can help you stop. But the more you understand why you're stopping, that can certainly, as you grow in virtue, and you go, see, there are 3 stages in the spiritual life, according to the Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Thomas Aquinas, the beginner, the advanced, and the perfect. And so when you're a beginner, perhaps a little more on the fearful side is more important. But as you get out of the mire, you get out of the guts, the sinful side, then the more the desire for God takes precedence. So does that answer your question?
I think so. Father, real quick question. Before a question, I want to remind everybody that your book is at Tan Books. The title, Angelic Virtues of Demonic Vices, and there's a subtitle. Jess, the subtitle is?
Yeah, the subtitle is Aquinas Practical Principles for Reaching Heaven and Avoiding Hell. And this 10books.com, 10books.com.
And Father, what we just got was very practical for all aspects of the faith. Jesse, you got a final question?
Yeah, Father, the last question is, why is humility so important in the spiritual life?
Well, you have to first of all understand it. And there's false humility, and there's the real thing, see? Now, the real thing is accepting the fact that you and I are limited creatures. Our talents are limited. We are sinners, and we are people who are in need of God's grace and help. And then also, humility leads us to think well of others and not evil of others. Humility helps us understand, see the good in other people too. It's both an intellectual virtue and a virtue of primarily of the will, but it really needs a little input from the old intellect. Okay. Now, the more you grow in humility, the more pride gets descended. So pride slowly diminishes, okay? But you need more than humility. At the same time, you need what St. Thomas, following Aristotle, but you never see it in the Catechism, I don't think, and you won't find it in a lot of places. You also need magnanimity.
I love that word.
Magnanimity is the desire to do great things with the graces that God, his talents he's given you.
Father, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We got 20 seconds. I just want to remind people to go to Tan Books and pick up Father Basil Cole's book, Angelic Virtues and Demonic Voices.
We'll have him on again.
Oh, we got to have. Father, I feel like you're like a coach to me on my spiritual life. I love that. Yeah. So thanks again for joining us here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. God bless you, Father.